A fortress, the color of dried blood, rises from the hill. Its Arabic name says everything. Al-Qala Alhambra, the Red Fortress. That redness is not paint. It is iron oxide locked inside the clay of the earth on which it stands. Of all the great palace complexes built across the medieval Islamic world, only one survives intact. This is it, the Alhambra of Granada, the only well-preserved palace of its kind anywhere on earth. Long before the Nasrid sultans arrived, this ridge had a history. The Sabika Hill, an outcrop of the Sierra Nevada, had already held earlier fortresses. The first written record of a red castle here dates to battles between the Arabs and Muladis during the rule of Abdallah ibn Muhammad, who reigned from 808 to 912. In the 11th century, the Jewish administrator Samuel ha-Nagid built his own palace on this same hill, reportedly complete with gardens and water features. The site had drawn power to it for generations before a single Nasrid stone was laid. In 1238, Muhammad ibn al-Ahmar, the first Nasrid emir and the founder of the Emirate of Granada, began construction of the Alhambra as a new residence and citadel. He had initially lived in an older fortification across the valley, but this hill demanded something greater. What transformed the Alhambra from a defensive stronghold into a living city was water. The Sultan's Canal, the Sakyat al-Sultan, carried water down from the mountains to the east. With it came fountains, hammams, gardens, and life. At its peak, the Alhambra was a self-contained world. Inside its walls, a Friday mosque, hammams, roads, houses, artisan workshops, a tannery. The complex stretches roughly 700 meters in length and up to 205 meters wide, covering some 142,000 square meters of hilltop. The most significant building campaigns came in the 14th century under Yusuf I and Muhammad V. Yusuf I raised the great Puerta de la Justicia in 1348, its outer arch carved with a hand, 5 fingers representing the 5 pillars of Islam, and above the inner arch, a key as a symbol of faith. Muhammad V's reign, from 1354 to 1391, marked the political and cultural high point of the entire Nasrid Emirate. He built the Palace of the Lions to the east of the Comares Palace in a space previously occupied by gardens. This was Nasrid architecture at its absolute zenith. The design logic is precise and purposeful. Every major courtyard is oriented north to south, so the main halls catch full sunlight at midday in winter, while the deep porticos shade them in summer. The walls are rammed earth, brick, and lime, then covered in layered plaster carved to extraordinary delicacy. What visitors see today is cream and ivory and shadow. What the Nasrid builders saw was vivid. The stucco, the wooden ceilings, the marble capitals, all painted in bright primary colors, red, blue, and gold. Inscription letters were picked out in gold or silver or white against turquoise and crimson grounds. The walls of the Alhambra are not silent. One phrase appears again and again in the carved inscriptions, Wa la ghalib illa Allah, and there is no victor but God. The poets behind those words include Ibn al-Khatib, who served as vizier and composed much of the Alhambra's poetry between 1332 and 1371, and Ibn Zamrak, who held the same office between 1354 and 1393. In the Palace of the Lions, some inscriptions are written in the first person, as if the room itself is speaking. The slender columns and fountains throughout the Nasrid palaces were carved from white marble quarried at Makail in Almeria province. Stone from a single source shaped into forms of impossible lightness. The last Nasrid Sultan, Muhammad XIII, surrendered the Emirate of Granada in January 1492. The Alhambra itself was never attacked. On 2nd January, the flag of Ferdinand and Isabella was raised above the Torre de la Vela, the 25-meter watchtower at the western end of the fortress, and a bell was added to it soon after, rung at regular intervals for centuries. The months after the conquest moved fast and dark. On 31st March 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella signed the Alhambra decree inside the complex, ordering the expulsion of every Jew in Spain who refused to convert. And in April, in the Hall of Ambassadors, Christopher Columbus received royal endorsement for his expedition. On 17th April, the contract was signed in that same room. In 1526, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles IX commissioned a Renaissance palace to be built directly alongside the Nasrid buildings. Construction began in 1527 and eventually stalled after 1637. Left unfinished, a monument to ambition interrupted. Two worlds of architecture stand face to face on the same hill, and neither blinks. Between 1810 and 1812, Napoleon's army occupied the Alhambra as a fortified position. When they evacuated, they tried to destroy it entirely. 8 towers were successfully blown up. What saved the rest was a Spanish soldier named José Garcia, who disabled the remaining fuses before they could ignite. In 1830, an American writer named Washington Irving came to live in Granada. He wandered the damaged, half-abandoned halls and wrote Tales of the Alhambra, published in 1832. That book, more than any other single act, sparked international fascination with the site and set its restoration in motion. Restoration had begun in 1828 under architect José Contreras. Decades later, in 1923, Leopoldo Torres Balbas was appointed chief architect. He worked until 1936, opening arcades that had been walled up, re-excavating pools that had been filled in, completing inscriptions, and installing a ceiling in the unfinished palace of Charles Tartuffe. His approach was guided by the principles of systematic scientific conservation. In 1870, Spain declared the Alhambra a national monument. In 1984, UNESCO listed it as a World Heritage Site. That same year, responsibility for the site transferred from the central government in Madrid to the regional government of Andalusia. 7 centuries of construction, destruction, and rediscovery. A name that means red, walls that bleed color at sunset, and rooms where the stone itself was taught to speak. The Alhambra is not a ruin. It is the only one of its kind, still standing, still telling its story to anyone who will stop long enough to listen.